Now they will know why they are afraid of the dark. Now they will learn why they fear the night.
In an age of blockbusters, audiences were gripped by fear. Fear of the unknown. Fear of the obscure. Until one man showed them there was nothing to fear. Cinephobia. Welcome, cinephiles, to another episode of the Cinephobia podcast, part of the YouTube channel Cinephobia, your home for all things cinema and scary. I'm your host with the most, JP. Our guests today on the cast are Adam Maiman, screenwriter, producer, and get this, lovely conversationalist. Thank you for being on the show today, Adam.
Thank you, I'm flattered.
And our next guest is Dorian Grimes, screenwriter, self-proclaimed gay icon, and don't forget, Barista. Dorian, thank you so much for being on the show.
Hello, thank you for having me.
All right, so our topic this episode concerns one of the scariest things in all of cinema, the one thing that makes audiences from all over cower and run away from the screen in fear. No, it's not the movie Cats or any other horror film. It's the one word that strikes fear in even the most hardened of filmgoers. Subtitles. That's right, just like having to eat your vegetables, there's nothing worse than having to read while you watch a movie, am I right? Just the mere mention of the words foreign film or subtitles draws the nervous uhs and ahs of even the most eclectic of us. But in the words of the 2019 Oscar recipient for Best Director, Bong Joon-ho, quote, "Once you overcome the 1-inch tall barrier of screen titles, you will be introduced to so many more amazing films." And with the film Parasite becoming the first foreign language film to win Best Picture at the Academy Awards, what better time to grab your bifocals and your copy of Kaya de Cinema? We're talking foreign language flicks today. Now, Parasite, as I said, won Best Foreign Language Film. Do you guys think it was Best Film of 2019? What are your opinions?
Well, it wasn't personally my favorite film of 2019, but I do think it was very well done, very well directed, very well acted, and I feel like it deserves the win. I'm very happy to see it win.
Yeah, for me, it also was not my favorite film, but it was a really solid film. Often you have Oscar picks that win, and everyone's like, that movie, but Parasite, I was like, oh, like I'm impressed. Like it was a very solid picture. It got me in the feels. I was a big fan of the film.
I really love the filmmaker's other film, Okja, Snowpiercer. Really big fan of his films. This one just didn't really resonate with me as some of his other ones did. I felt like I just didn't really grasp some of the subtext that I needed to in order to fully grasp what was going on and enjoy it as much as I could. So I feel like I need to give it another watch. But definitely not my favorite, but definitely a great film, great story, great characters. What do you feel the impact of this win is going to be on the foreign film market in America? Do you feel like Americans and theaters are going to be more willing to open up to foreign language films? Dorian, let's start with you.
Yeah, I think that they probably will be, and I'm glad. For example, Adam's parents recently watched Parasite, and that's not something they ever would have done on their own. It was all because it won the Oscar. They wouldn't have been foreign film people. That wouldn't have been up their alley. And I think it's gonna kind of make a lot of people want to cut down that barrier. They're gonna be like, okay, like I have to read subtitles, but apparently, the Oscars thinks that this is worth it, which is, very big to some people.
Adam, what did your parents think of Parasite?
I think they liked it. I think they seemed on similar grounds with you. It wasn't their favorite from the but I think they both certainly enjoyed it. And it's a hard movie not to at least appreciate. It looks great. It's very well done, and I thought its thematics were excellent. Like I thought it was the most interesting thing to me about that movie was the fact that you see these people who are really like conniving, and they're trying to they're very manipulative in beating the system, but instead of to make lots of money, it's all just to make decent jobs and wages. And I think particularly in a time where we struggle with such income inequality, it was a very interesting look at that while also having a lot of tension and some very neat, interesting twists along the way.
Very relevant topic today in terms of class. One thing that I found interesting was, although it's the first foreign language film to win Best Picture, it's not the first foreign film to win Best Picture. As we know, Britain has been winning Best Picture films for decades now, including Tom Jones, Oliver, Chariots of Fire, The King's Speech. What does this mean to the foreign film market as opposed to what it mean to Britain when their films would win Best Picture? Does it matter that's a foreign language film as opposed to an English-speaking film? What are your thoughts?
I feel like it definitely matters because I feel like it opens the door for more filmmakers to be able to make films in their own language, and people from countries with like less opportunities and less
Resources.
Yes, less resources in the film industry. Like we know that people in England can make films. We know people in America can make films. But I think this is really gonna help break down the door so filmmakers in other countries can be like, I don't need to make my film be in English. I don't need to cater to the English speaking audience to make my film. I can make it like true to my vision. And I think that's gonna help these films be more truthful.
I think also, with a movie like Parasite, I think it is a lot different having like a Korean film make it, because you not only have the language barrier, which I do think is a big barrier, but you also have a lot of cultural barriers. I've seen a good amount of Korean films. I'm a big fan of Korean cinema, and Parasite had a lot of like sensibilities that resonated with other Korean films that I've seen. So it's also getting like a whole different cultural perspective. Different countries have whole different ideas about story structure and about character, and you also get to see some of the things that we see as tropes, or Korean people see as tropes. Might see as more original because it's less. We're less used to it in the kind of films and markets we see.
Very good point. Like you said, it exposes people to lots of different cultures that they might not usually be exposed to just by watching American films. But do you feel that sometimes maybe those cultures or those messages in foreign films might not translate well to American audiences? Do you feel like that might be a barrier which prevents some audiences from watching some of these films? What do you think, Dorian?
I think it definitely could be a barrier, but I think it doesn't matter if American audiences or English speaking audiences aren't particularly going to understand your film. You know, I think it's about making the art, and I think we as English speakers and as Americans should challenge ourselves to be able to understand and appreciate films made from other cultures, and I think that might be able to help us have a better understanding of the world.
Very well said.
I think it can both be a barrier and an advantage depending on the media. I know me and Dorian watch a decent amount of anime, which is the whole Japanese animation, and there's a lot of stuff in that unfortunately reads as very offensive in our culture, and there's a lot of different ones, but at the same time there's a lot of possibilities and stuff that they can reach that you don't see in American media as much, and those sensibilities can make it seem original and more novel and new, and also tackle ground that would seem more innovative, even though it may not seem as innovative in that specific culture.
Now, let me just play devil's advocate here for a minute. Why should we watch foreign films? I mean, you got to read for 2 hours. A lot of people consider foreign films boring. Well, why should people bother? Aren't movies to be enjoyed? Aren't they entertainment? Isn't it more like work having to sit down and read subtitles?
Well, I kind of agree that movies are entertainment, and for that reason, I think if you don't want to watch foreign films, if you're not willing to put in the effort of reading the subtitles, or if that just doesn't sound fun to you, then like sure, don't read them. You know, it's no skin off my teeth. But I think if you're someone who is invested in film, who wants to be in the film industry like all of us do, or even just someone who is invested in art in general, I think it is important to kind of have more of a worldwide understanding of that art and of film instead of just your own culture.
Adam, what do you think?
So I'm one of the people where I generally I have a pretty low attention span with a lot of media. I get bored easily. Often movies that other people seem to like, I criticize because they just seem slow-paced or meandering and whatnot. And also with subtitles, it is a barrier. It's not something that I think in an ideal world, we wouldn't need subtitles because we'd understand, but you do have to focus. So much of the film is visual, and when you have subtitles, you do have to focus on a second visual element. So with that said, you talk about foreign films as Arthouse and that, but the more foreign films I've watched, while plenty fit that category, plenty of them are also amazing. So like the question of why watch foreign films is like, why watch any film? You could not watch it, but you'd be missing out on a lot of amazing experiences by skipping out on some excellent pieces of art.
So it seems like if you're a fan of films, if you're a fan of filmmaking, then it's really important for you to watch foreign films in order to expose yourself to different styles of filmmaking, different unique perspectives on the world, and also different cultures. So it seems almost like health food, whereas some American films might consider junk food. This is more like you're eating your vegetables, you're eating your fruits, and it's good for you.
I think it is kind of like that for a lot of these movies. Like watching Parasite for me definitely felt like eating health food, but I also really enjoy eating the junk food of foreign things. Like Adam and I are big fans of Naruto, and I think this is a whole nother podcast, but I think Naruto is a masterfully well done work, but it does feel like junk food, even though I'm reading the subtitles because I'm enjoying it so much. It's bite-sized, it's flashy, and I think that's almost a whole nother fun, It's like you could eat popcorn, which like we're used to in America, or you could like go try some like dessert from another country you've never had, and
Yes.
that might be more exciting.
Maybe you'll love it. Maybe
yeah.
you'll like it more than the popcorn you're eating.
Yeah, and I think often we have that idea that it's foreign film is the kind of healthy stuff, and often it's because a lot of nations have lower budgets, so inherently they have to go more art house. And I think the people who generally watch foreign films were generally like the cinephiles, the people who are super obsessed with it, who would lean more towards that sensibility. But I think as the market increases, for me, like a movie like Parasite is way closer to like an American thriller than a kind of art house piece. And that's one of the reasons I really respected its win. Is there's plenty of foreign films I've seen that are slow and drag on, and that I could see traditionally winning an Oscar, but haven't. But Parasite to me is a very entertaining film. It has its slowness in parts, and there are certainly films that speed up comparatively. But I think it's a misconception to think of a foreign film all as this kind of healthy art house stuff. There's plenty. Some of the ones on my favorite list are like action movies and stuff that you wouldn't. While they have a different sensibility than American action, they can be just as engaging and just as entertaining. They're just slightly more harder than a traditional Marvel movie because you have subtitles.
So it's kind of unfair in order to just group all foreign films into one category and say that they're all art house films, whereas they're very eclectic. You got the action pictures. I've seen a lot of really great horror films that are foreign language. And most people watch American films with subtitles on anyway because sometimes it's hard to hear things. If you ever watch British movies, sometimes it's really hard to understand their accents, so I would usually turn on the subtitles for them. So there's really not much of a difference between watching foreign films with subtitles and just watching normal films with subtitles.
Subtitles are subtitles. I think the difference is you have less information that you can understand from it, while you can at least take some from the audio. But again, plenty of people watch stuff on mute or in low spaces and have to deal with subtitles. And I think we're also more used to reading subtitles than I think we think nowadays. I know I scroll on Facebook and all the videos are subtitled and before you turn on the sound. So I think it's something that you're more used to, and again, it's a barrier. And for some people, I know how they process reading. Subtitles are just too fast for them. So I certainly see it being a specific barrier for some people. But if you can handle it, there's some great stuff out there that you'd be missing otherwise.
I think in general, a lot of people do read subtitles even with English things. I think the one thing that's a little bit harder when it's in a foreign language reading the subtitles is when you look away from the screen for a moment and all of a sudden realize that you can't understand what they're saying anymore. Like, I'll be so used to like reading and understanding and being like, yeah, I totally get what these characters are saying. And then I'll check a text on my phone and be like, why don't I understand what's happening anymore?
What
They're
happened?
like, oh, right, I don't speak Japanese.
Very good point. It seems as the more normal subtitles become, especially like Adam said on Facebook, on Instagram, a lot of things are starting out subtitled. Maybe audiences will become a little bit more comfortable watching subtitled films. We got to talk about subtitles versus dubbed films, because I know a lot of foreign language films, they'll have other actors dub them in English in order to make it easier for American audiences to watch them, or English speaking audiences. But a lot of people feel like the dubbing kind of takes away from it. It's definitely not in character with the tone. Do you feel dubbing takes you out of the movie a little bit as compared to subtitles, or is there really no difference? Dorian, what do you think?
I think the deal with dubbing versus subbing is that inherently they become two different medias, and I'm not going to say that one is inherently better or worse than the other, but they become different. They have it's the same story, but it's told in two different ways. And a lot of times I think we associate the dub with being worse because oftentimes it is done under worse circumstances. Possibly, I imagine it's often done with a lower budget, it's done with less experienced actors. So I think that dubbing has kind of gotten a bad name, but I don't think that that's inherent. I think something dubbed could be good, could be just as good as the original, but I think it is a different story. And I think that dubbing I feel a little bit better about when it's something that's animated, because I feel like that was something drawn and then voice acted anyway. I feel a little bit weird when you're dubbing over a real person, because I feel like that's kind of mixing two different performances in a way that might not gel as well. So I feel more confident on it with animated media.
Yeah, I was gonna say, similarly, the dub versus sub debate's big in anime, and one of the problem with that is dubbing companies, particularly because in America, was historically viewed as children's television because it was cartoony. So you had historically those dub productions were a lot worse voice acted, so you had a worse experience. But now there's certain dubs where it's if I think a media, particularly animated media, is dubbed with incredible voice actors. There are some great examples. I prefer the dub if it's a solid piece, because even though you have different things lost in translation, often the subtitles are more comprehensive in the translation because they have more on screen. But you can lose stuff in subtitle translation as well, particularly sometimes the pacing or the types of words, because languages are so different. And I do think that there's a big note, as Dorian said, on whether it's animated or not, because animation, the lip movements generally are more broad, so it's much easier to track any words from it. And also, dubbing in animation is a skill of trying to make it seem like through those lip movements that it's saying the same thing. They often try to change the dialogue in order to match the lip movements better, versus the complexity of you see a real human face with real mouth movements. You usually won't match up. So if you're watching it, the question is what's more distracting, seeing mouth movements not add up or having to read is usually the debate when you're talking about live action films.
I thought Adam brought up an interesting point with animes usually being treated as children's shows to the American market, because that also brings up the interesting topic of censorship. A lot of times, animes in Japan will be targeted towards like older teens, and I'm sure their censorship laws are different, so they can get away with different words, different types of content, that when they become dubbed in America, they try to make it, PG. So a lot of it gets lost in that censorship as well.
And you probably want to keep it closest to the original iteration of the film or the show as possible by having the native language on it. For instance, I remember recently I went back and I watched High Tension, which is a French film by filmmaker Andre Aja. And I was looking for a subtitle version of it, but all I could find was the dub versions. And everybody said, don't watch the dub versions, watch the subtitle versions, the best one. It took me forever to find it, but I finally did. So if you had a choice, does it matter to you? Would you prefer subtitles over dubbed over subtitles? What's your preference?
I would, in most cases, go with subbed. I think that's probably the most authentic way to experience it. There would be exceptions where if someone's like, hey, this dub is really faithful, it's really well acted. But I think part of me would still want to see the sub, just so I feel like I have that experience as close as possible to the way it was intended to be experienced.
Absolutely.
For me, I think also with subtitle, you do not lose original performances. So for me, if it's a live action piece, I almost always will watch the sub version. When it's animated, I usually do a little bit of research if they're both available. And if the dub is of quality, I've even seen some dubs that are better quality than, in my opinion, than the sub. Then I'll usually go for the dub just because of ease of use. You don't have to keep your eyes away. You can get the entire experience.
The age-long debate, sub versus dubbed. Now, one thing that I find interesting is Italian filmmakers, specifically like Sergio Leone, they would shoot their movies and they would have the actors speak in whatever language they spoke in because they would have a mix of Italian, Spanish, American, and whatever actors would speak whatever language, and then they would just dub it all over later, which if you ever watch a lot of Sergio Leone's films, you would see the lips don't match up with the voice being dubbed a lot. What do you feel about movies in this instance where they do stuff like that?
I feel like that's a really interesting filmmaking technique, is having all the actors speak in their own languages. I feel like that kind of lends an interesting authenticity to the film, but I would almost like to see that not dubbed, you know? I just kind of want to see a whole bunch of people talking at each other in different languages and have it subtitled.
Yeah, for me, I think it's also the amount of staying in the world. I can see some kind of aesthetic where you see the lips not moving and it fits with that piece, but for the most part, that just seems like a more distracting thing for my taste. Some people might think subtitles are more distracting, but I feel like when I'm watching something with subtitles, it still all feels like the same world. And it feels like, oh, these people are speaking this language. This is an authentic thing. Seeing it dubbed, to me, would take me out of it more because you're like, oh, I'm constantly thinking about the process of someone recording over that original person, which would take me out of the process more.
It does, and oftentimes I'll watch Sergio Leone movies, and I'll be real intent on watching what's going on, and then I'll see the lips just not match up. Kind of takes you out the movie a little bit. Now, let's go on to our favorite foreign films. So we all came up with lists of our favorite foreign films. We thought long and hard about it, spent many sleepless nights laying in bed thinking about this list. So I'm going to go ahead and let Adam tell us what his favorite films are first. Adam, lay it on us. What's your favorite foreign films?
All right. The first one, if you like Parasite and you were interested in more Korean cinema, here's a movie that's far better than Parasite. It's honestly a whole trilogy as well. It's Old Boy, part of the Vengeance trilogy. This film's it starts with a man locked away for like over a decade, I believe, and doesn't know why. And then he gets out. And a lot of crazy stuff happens. You have some fight scenes that have inspired shows like Daredevil. This is just an intense thriller drama. It's hard. It's hard not to like this movie. It's one of those films that before I was skeptical of foreign films. Watch Old Boy and then see if you have the same skepticism, because it's an incredible piece.
Old Boy, really great film by Chan-wook Park. Old Boy, very, very good film. Really enjoyed that one as well. Just don't watch the remake by Spike Lee. Definitely watch the original one.
Not seen the remake. I'm somewhat darkly curious to see the remake because I've heard not great things.
I think Josh Brolin plays the protagonist in that one. It's just not the same. It just doesn't have the same feel or the quality or the shock, when you find out all the twists to it. What else you got on your list?
All right, this one, I'm usually not a huge fan of horror. I don't watch a lot of horror, but this is by far probably my favorite horror film. It's Raw. It's a French, Belgian, and Italian film. It's often described as a feminist film, which is a little odd. The most feminist thing about it is often it's like run by women leads. But this is, it's about cannibals, and there are a few movies where they do it so right where you're then fascinated. After watching this movie, I just kept thinking about the dynamics of cannibals and all the stuff you could do with cannibals. They make cannibals relatable in this incredible way. It's a heart-wrenching film. It's a terrifying film. If you're someone who's woozy, do not watch this film. It's excellent. It's definitely my favorite horror film.
It's about time we gave a voice to all the cannibals out there. What do you got next on your list, Adam?
This is a German film that if you like kind of fun run and gun action movies, if you like kind of time travel and redoing, you gotta watch Run Lola Run.
Yes.
Run Lola Run, basically the same events happen 3 times. So you see how they happen once, it goes back in time. You see how it happens again, it goes back in time. And this film's just got such a good energy. It's so specific in its style, and it's a really fun movie. It's one of those movies, if you are going to see a foreign film, and be like, I want to see one that's not boring.
Yep.
Run Lola Run, not boring. One of my tops.
That's one that's going to keep your attention. If you're thinking foreign films are all just talky, boring stuff, no. Watch yourself some Run Lola Run.
So if you think foreign films are slow and art house and boring, this one is one of those films on the list. But it also has such a brilliant premise and has had some scenes that hit me so hard. So if you're ready for a bit of a slog but a worthwhile one, you got to see Force Majeure. It's got...
What is it called?
Force Majeure. I'm definitely pronouncing it wrong.
Majeure?
It's spelled FORCEMAJEURE.
Okay.
So it's hard to pronounce. It's from Sweden, France, Norway, and Denmark. It's got 4 different languages, and basically the premise is incredible. It's about a family that goes on a vacation, a ski trip, and in the beginning of the vacation there's an avalanche. And the dad, one of the protagonists, the dad of this family, during this avalanche, runs and leaves his children. And then they find out that the avalanche is fine, everyone's safe, and they have to spend the rest of the vacation knowing that the dad just left his family to die. And it is a heavy film. It's a fascinating film. It's about processing when your instincts are just not good, and how it's like to live with that, and how it's like to be around people like that. Its concept is so good that when I saw this on the list, when I was looking up foreign films to remember what some of my favorites were, I was like, Force Majeure! Gotta see that film. The next one this is an action movie. It's a pretty standard action movie. This is from Korea, and it's a zombie flick. And I know a lot of people are very skeptical and don't like the zombie genre. I always really liked the potential of the zombie genre, but there are so many zombie films that just disappoint. But this is not one of them. If you want to see Train to Busan, it's a South Korean film that involves a zombie breakout in a train station and on trains, and it's an action film, and it's fun. Now this one, I have not seen this film since I was a child, but it has affected me so much that I'm definitely ready to see it again. It's a little bit harder to reach in our modern streaming world. It hasn't been on streaming services for a while, but it's Studio Ghibli's Spirited Away. One good thing about Studio Ghibli films, particularly Spirited Away, the dubbing's great. You don't need to see it. It deals with like a girl who suddenly her parents become pigs, and she goes in this whole weird dream world where she's held captive and has to do like laundry and work. And it's got such vast different aesthetics. It encapsulated such an fascinating feeling of loneliness and connection at the same time that has stuck with me for years. So you got to give my final pick. You got to give Spirited Away a shot, and you don't have to read subs. You can if you can find the dub version, it's an excellent version.
Dorian, moment of truth. Favorite foreign films?
All right, we're going to start it off with my favorite foreign film, Persepolis. For those of you who don't know, this is a...
Oh, it's an animated film.
Yes, it's an animated French and Iranian film. It's based on a autobiographical graphic novel by the author, I think you pronounce her name, Marjan Satrapi. And she grew up in Iran with the backdrop of the Iranian Revolution. One of the things I find really fascinating about this is that it's a story about an Iranian girl in Iran, but it's actually in French. So that I feel like that's pretty interesting. Is kind of like this meshing of like all these different worlds. Like I'm in America, reading English subtitles, hearing French, watching the story of someone in Iran. So that's pretty cool to me. I also think the animation is completely beautiful. It's probably one of my favorite animated films I've seen in terms of style, and the narrative is very relatable, very personable. So I think that's definitely a must watch there.
That's your top film?
My top foreign film, yes.
Okay.
Next we got another foreign film, obviously. This one's
film from America.
Wait a minute, wrong podcast.
we've got Like Water for Chocolate. Saw this in a film class, and it really it stuck with me in a way that none of the other films from that class did. I honestly don't really remember the other ones, but I felt like this one had such a, this one's also on the backdrop of a revolution, the Mexican Revolution, and it's also just a very interpersonal story. It's a magical realism story, which there aren't a ton of those out there. So I thought that was very interesting to see, and that's another thing that's great about looking at films from other cultures, is that you get to see genres like magical realism that aren't used a ton in America, that are used more in Mexican and probably broadly most of Latin America.
Spanish films, yeah.
Yeah, I don't know how broad the magical realism goes, but I know it's there, and I know other cultures have it, and it's a genre I really appreciate. And my last film on my list is also about revolution, so you can see that there's a little bit of a pattern here with me.
Okay.
And that film is La Révolution Française. It is one of the longest films ever made. It is 360 minutes.
Holy shit.
And I've watched all of it.
Ah.
Not in one sitting.
Okay.
But it's just a very kind of earnest historical take on the French Revolution. It was made on the 200th anniversary of the revolution to honor it and the historical figures there. It does a really good job delving into the lives of a lot of the figures. I think the casting is really amazing. And, if I was making this movie, I would have cut it down to 2, maybe 3 hours, but hey, just treat it like a miniseries. Just watch it an hour at a time.
You guys are looking for some good foreign films out there to watch. You got some good titles right there. I'm going to delve in real quick to a bunch of movies I got on my list. I'm not going to go in too deep to plot detail. I'm just going to mention them. I'm going to start with French films. Probably my favorite film of all time is Amélie. Love Amélie. Well, Dorian just mentioned watching Like Water for Chocolate in film school. I watched Amélie in film school for the first time, was blown away. Definitely one of the more popular French foreign language films out there. We're going to go back into the 60s and 70s with Contempt by Jean-Luc Godard. I can't really describe it. Just go watch it. It's fucking heartbreaking. Great film. Next one on my list, Belle de Jour by Louis Brunel. I can't pronounce his name. Belle de Jour, great film. Prostitution. Another film takes place in the 60s. Go watch it. Last film on my French list, Day for Night, Truffaut. Moving on to Asian cinema, Old Boy was on my list. Next one, I'd be remiss if we didn't talk about Akira Kurosawa in our podcast on foreign language films. Got to give it up to Kurosawa, Seven Samurai. The film I'm actually a big fan of is Rashomon. Another director we have to talk about, John Woo, hard-boiled, excellent action film. Moving on to Kung Fu Hustle by Stephen Chow. You're going to laugh your ass off. It's going to stick with you long after the credits roll. Great film. Going back to South Korean cinema is a movie I saw recently called I Saw the Devil, about the serial killer guy and this guy tracking him. It is brutal. It is slowly paced, but it will draw you in like a magnet. Check it out. Next up on my list is Italian films. These guys are known for making some really good horror flicks, so I got to throw in Dario Argento's Suspiria and Tenebrae in there. If you've not seen any Dario Argento movies, do yourself a favor, go watch them. Another great Italian horror filmmaker is Lucio Fulci. Go see Zombie, City of the Living Dead. He's really into his zombie flicks. He makes a mean one. And we got to talk about Sergio Leone, Fistful of Dollars for a few dollars more. quintessential foreign language films. Those are all dubbed. You don't have to worry about watching subtitles. If you're looking to get into something without having to go too deep on reading subtitles, check you out some Leone movies. Next one, a bunch of list of movies from Europe and Spain and all over. One of them is Let the Right One In. They did a remake of it. It's a vampire film. I think the remake was called Let Me In. It's about this young girl. She's a vampire and she befriends this young boy and they become friends and he learns she's a vampire. Anyway, great film. Go check it out. Run Lola Run, also on my list. Another favorite film of mine, City of God. Last movie on my list, You Tu Mama Tambien, directed by Alfonso Cuarón. Beautiful film.
I actually have seen The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. I just forgot I saw it because it was on TV, intercut with commercials, so I didn't really feel like I was watching a movie.
Yeah.
But I have seen that, and I remember liking it.
Last thing I want to talk about is American remakes of foreign films. Now, as you know, a lot of foreign films are so good, resonate so much that a lot of American filmmakers will try and remake them. Sometimes they'll turn out good, sometimes not so much. But some of the biggest ones that I can think of is the Martin Scorsese film The Departed, which was a remake of the film Internal Affairs, a 2002 Chinese film. Another film which gets remade a lot is Akira Kurosawa's Seven Samurai, which was made into The Magnificent Seven, which was also made into another remake of The Magnificent Seven. A Fistful of Dollars is actually a remake of Yojimbo, another Kurosawa film, Japanese, came out in 1961. The Birdcage, which the remake I thought really killed it. I have not seen the original one, but I'm sure it's just as good. It's called La Cage of Follies, 1978. A couple titles which are also remakes that you might not know. True Lies, the James Cameron film. 12 Monkeys, I was actually surprised to find out that was a remake. The film Insomnia, Christopher Nolan's film starring Al Pacino, Robin Williams. That's a remake of a Danish or Norwegian film. Of course, The Ring. We had all those implants like The Ring, The Grudge, all these, scary young Japanese girl films. So yeah, is there any other foreign films made into American remakes that you guys can think of that you particularly liked?
I'm sure there is, but I have not really. I'm sure there's plenty that I've seen that I liked that I just still to this day never realized that they were a remake from a foreign film.
This is slightly off topic, but one thing that really annoys me is when people take British media and remake it for Americans, and it's never as good. And I'm like, Americans, please, you can get through the British accents. Put on the subtitles if you have to, but you really don't need a whole piece of media remade for you just because of the accent.
That's right.
And I think this also goes into just remakes in general a little bit with because one of the things, particularly with the foreign films, if you're remaking something, is I can see it as like a form of adaptation, is you're kind of adapting this work. And I think instead of remaking it, adapting it and taking core, but really kind of making it your own, and particularly with the elements of your culture, I can see as a very worthy pursuit. I think when you're just kind of taking it directly and being like, well, I liked this movie, let me make that again, but in a different language, it's like, what's the point at that point? I think watch it with subtitles in the original.
Yeah, just do yourself a favor. Watch the original, read the subtitles, and enjoy some good cinema out there. I think that covers everything in terms of foreign language films, subtitles. I think we had a really good, enlightening discussion. Hopefully, this inspired you to go see more foreign language films, broaden your horizons into different cultures, different perspectives, different styles of filmmaking. And I'd like to thank you guys for being on the podcast today. I've been your host, JP. Don't forget to check out the other episodes of our podcast and click that like and subscribe button to show your support. As always, stay cheesy and remember, there's nothing to fear but film itself.